before you tonight, that we just come with hearts that want to hear from your Spirit, Lord, to just, what is it, God, that you want to minister to me? Help us, Lord, to understand your word. And so, again, we just are thankful and grateful that we have this opportunity. And so we commit this time to you now, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so we are in chapter 19 tonight of Genesis. And last week when we had looked at chapter 18, we had seen how that God had revealed to Abraham that he was about to destroy Sodom. And so Abraham interceded on behalf of the people of Sodom, primarily for the righteous, but he was also interceding for the lost. And so that's kind of where we pick up. But, you know, something I was thinking about this morning is that, and all of us, I think, know the phrase, hindsight is 20/20. And, you know, the idea behind that is if you had knew what you know now back then, you'd make different decisions. And so, you know, when you think of Lot, I think that would be something, when you look at his story and his, you know, I'm sure he probably would have looked back upon his life and probably would have thought to himself, man, if I only knew then what I know now, I probably would have made different decisions. And so, you know, and really it all started, if you recall, when Abraham decided that he and Lot needed to separate, that they needed to go into different directions because there was just, their flocks were too numerous, their herdsmen were getting in arguments. And it all started because Abraham said, Lot, you choose first where you want to go. And as we talked about before, Lot didn't pray about where God would want him to go. He just picked a destination that looked very nice, and not realizing, you know, if, for example, if you had to choose between Holbrook and Flagstaff, what would you choose? Yeah. But a lot of people would probably choose Flagstaff, right? I mean, because of how it looks, you know, what's available. But yet, if you are somebody, let's say, for example, a conservative, and you understand that that's not Flagstaff, you might say, I don't know that I really want to live there, even though it may be a nice looking place and have a lot of amenities. I just point that out because when Lot chose to get nearby Sodom, he's choosing because it seems beneficial to his flocks. But it wasn't just that he kind of was camped nearby. He eventually ends up in the city of Sodom. And what makes things even worse is when he was taken captive, when the inhabitants of Sodom and the surrounding cities were conquered by the four kings up in the area of Iraq and Iran today, he goes right back into Sodom. You know, when Abraham comes and rescues him, he has the opportunity to go somewhere else, and he doesn't go anywhere else. He chooses to stay there in Sodom. And again, it just makes me wonder, based on what we're going to be reading tonight, we probably won't get through all of chapter 19, but it makes me wonder if after all of this, Lot looked back and thought to himself, man, if I had just made different decisions. And he would have had he prayed. Had he sought God and said, God, where do you want me to go? He probably would have made different choices. Okay, so in verse 1, it says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. So I want to stop there. What does that tell you about Lot, that the fact that he is sitting in the gate of the city? I mean, obviously this is here for a reason, right? It's not just, you know, in terms of location. There's a specific reason as to why he is sitting at the gate.
Position in politics or in council?
Okay? So where was matters usually judged during this time? Because they didn't have courthouses, okay? So when people had issues, legal matters that needed to be resolved, where did people usually go to have their case heard? The city gate, right? So that tells us something about Lot in terms of that he had a position of leadership and had a position where he would decide matters. Now, and I think rightfully so, Lot gets a lot of criticism, for his decisions, his choices. What I was conveying this morning over at the Bread of Life, to me, Lot, if we were to put it in today's terms, he would be somebody who is a Christian, but not a very strong one. And we'll talk about that, why that is. So Lot gets a lot of criticism for, not just that he's living in the city, but he's has been enfolded into the city and taken a position of leadership of a judge. But I want to read to you a part of scripture from 2 Peter. It's in 2 Peter chapter 2, and in verse 4 it says this: "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly." And then I want you to notice the next 2 verses here. It says, "And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by a sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard." So what does that tell you about how Lot perceived where he lived? How did he feel about where he lived in terms really more so about the people he was living among?
It grieved him.
Grieved him? Yeah. Right? And from what we're going to read here in chapter 19, you can understand why he would be grieved. I mean, it was a wicked place. And again, when you understand what takes place in chapter 19, it's not like this was a unique one-time thing. This was probably a common thing, type of thing that happened in Sodom. And so you look at it, and again, you would look at it and go, why would he have stayed? When he had I don't know what the murder capital of the country is right now, but I think like Chicago would be right up there when you hear about the number of murders, right? And if you were concerned about the murder rate of a place, you probably wouldn't think of Chicago as a place that you would choose to want to live, no matter how nice of a city it may look, right? And so as you think about what I just read there in 2 Peter, and what we read here in Genesis chapter 19, can you understand why he may have chosen to accept the position of a judge? I mean, what might he have been looking to accomplish in that position?
Change what was going on there.
Okay, yeah, change. Now, remember, Abraham was able to kind of plead with God that if there were at least 10 righteous in the city, God said, I won't destroy it, right? We know that there weren't 10 righteous. As a matter of fact, there was just one righteous person, and I'll convey that as we go along. And that was Lot. And we know that Lot was righteous. Now, was he living a righteous life? It'd be a stretch probably to say that. So I think in his decision to occupy this position, I think he did it because he had a hope that maybe he could make a difference. Obviously he wasn't. The city was beyond redemption. There was no redeeming the city. But I think that's why he chose a position of a judge, if you will, because when you think of tombstone back in the day, what term would you use to describe Tombstone as a city? lawless, okay? And I point that out because to me, that's Sodom. It's a lawless place. And I think the heart of Lot was, let me at least try to bring some law into their lives. So again, Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords." Now, I wanted to stop there for a second because that phrase, "my lords," remember I said last week when Abraham saw the three men and he came to them and he bowed down before one of them and said, "My Lord," and that some believe that Abraham knew that was God. And the reason that that's conveyed is because of the Hebrew word Adonai, which is oftentimes used of God. But I also said that that word Adonai is not always used to, in reference to God. It's also used, and this word here, my lords, is a form of that word. I think it's Adonai. So it doesn't necessarily mean how it was used previously means that Abraham knew. But here it's very obvious that Lot does not know that these are angels. Okay, he just thinks that these are two men. So he says to them, when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." And they said, "No, we'll spend the night in the town square." Now, remember, and we've talked about this before, that in this time, they didn't have hotels, all right? And most places didn't even have inns. And even if they did have an inn, it's typically not a place that somebody would stay. I mean, that was like if you had somebody coming to visit you and they couldn't stay at your house and they were just going to pick a motel in town, there's probably a couple that you could think of that you would not want them to stay at just because they're known for drugs and alcohol and things, right? Well, that's the same kind of idea. A lot of the inns back then, it's not a place that you would want people to, your common people to stay in. So when a person was traveling and they came through town, they would go to the town square. And what they would hope is that someone would show hospitality. Now remember, hospitality, as we talked about back in Hebrews chapter 13, was very prominent in their cultures. It was like, this is one of the most important things you could do. So you would go to the town square and hope that somebody would open their home to you. And if not, you just slept in the square. So when you think about what Lot says here, they say, hey, he says, "Hey, why don't you come and stay at my house?" And they say, "No, we'll just stay here in the square." And then verse 3, it says, "But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he made them a feast and baked them unleavened bread, and they ate." So is Lot, I ask this especially if you're familiar with the story, but is Lot doing this purely out of hospitality? No. Because what we're about to read, he knows that this would happen. All right. Now, again, if you know that this is the kind of place that you're living in, it's like, why would you continue to live there, right? You would think. So, verse 4, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house." Now, notice how that's phrased. Now, some of the other translation words a little differently, but the idea is there's a whole bunch of men here. Now, I suspect that when these two angels, because again, as far as anybody else knows, these are just men, right? They don't know that they're angels. So when they come into town, and I think you can imagine, even if this was not what you would call a small town like, let's say, Holbrook, but it's such that when somebody new came into town, people knew. So I imagine that when they came into town, people start getting word, and it's like, hey, there's a couple new guys in town. And it's like, everybody's, okay, let's get together and let's go get these guys. So both young and old people, the last men surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." All right, and of course, I don't have to expound on that. You guys know exactly what they want to do to these guys. Now think about that. Think about, the fact that all these guys, now, we talked about this before, but when we typically think of Sodom in terms of the immorality, what kind of sin do we typically associate with Sodom? Homosexuality, right? Now, when you have this many men, does that mean all the men are homosexuals? No, it doesn't have to mean that they're all homosexuals. Some of them might be what we call bisexual, right? But think about and one of the things that the angels is going to convey a little bit later is that the cry, just reaches up to God. You can understand why. And again, I would suggest that this was not out of the ordinary. How many other people would visit Sodom not knowing what the city was like, and only to have a bunch of people come and basically rape you? Think about that for a moment. So like I said, this is not some out of the ordinary type thing. Now, so Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who I have not known any man. Let me bring them out, and you do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Okay, so now, please don't misunderstand. I'm not in any way going to try and defend what Lot does. But I do want to provide some context to why he thought that he needed to do this. There was a movie that came out several years ago. It was based on a true story where there were SEALs in Afghanistan who came under attack, and all of them died but one. And he escapes to a village that is ruled by a warlord. Now, warlords were not fans of the Taliban. They didn't, work together. And so when the Taliban had found out that this SEAL is in the village, they go to the village and tell the guy, give us the American. And the warlord said, no, he is under our protection. And they end up actually having a firefight as a result of that. And the reason is because in that region, in the culture of that area, if you invited somebody into your home, their protection was your utmost responsibility. It's like you protect them at all costs, whatever it takes, kind of a thing. Now, this tells you kind of where Lot is, because he's willing to give up his own daughters. Now, I would also say this, even as immoral as a country as we have become and are becoming, this would still, for a lot of people, even people who aren't Christians, would abhor this idea. I mean, if you heard of this happen, now, I will tell you, these kind of things still happen today, even in our country. How many times have you heard on the news a parent being arrested because they sold their child and as a sex idol kind of a thing, right? And so it happens. But when we hear this, we're appalled by that, right? Even most ordinary people are appalled by that kind of thing. But I would suggest to you that it was not appalling to the people of Sodom. This was not like any, and when they offer them, they say, but they said, stand back, and they said, this fellow came to sojourn, and he has become judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Right? So it's like they have no interest in them. It's like, we don't want them. We want these guys. And it's not just because of the sexual orientation. They want to just demean somebody. So, you think about that. How depraved of a culture was that place? So much so that they say, because I think they say, no, we want them. Because if they wanted to, they could have taken the 2 daughters at any time and done what they wanted to. And who's going to do anything? Even though they had a king, right? I mean, this kind of tells you a little something about what kind of law that they had or lack of. These guys aren't afraid of anything happening to them. Who's going to come and arrest them or take them and punish them, right? So they have no fear of that at all. So I think this kind of just gives you a little bit of glimpse in there. Now, again, I am not in any way justifying Lot's, how he chooses to handle this. I just put it in the context that he valued the protection of the people who came under his roof. He just doesn't know what to do. Now, obviously, we can look at it and say, well, why don't you just, well, if he hadn't been there in the first place, all of this wouldn't have happened. And, but that's, like I said, hindsight. But he could have called out to God. He could have said, God, what do I do? So he's responding from a human perspective. And this seems like his only option is that. Now, can you imagine his daughters? His daughters are inside. Now, I don't know if they heard the conversation, but can you imagine if you were the daughters and you heard Dad say, hey, don't bother these guys. Say, I'll give you my $2 and you can do with them whatever you want. It's like, man, what a great dad, huh? I don't think he would have been nominated for Father of the Year. So again, you look at this, and again, it's like they don't even entertain it. All they want to do is to take hold of these guys and to abuse them. So they said, then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great. So they wore themselves out, groping for the door. And then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So it's like, this is judgment time. There is no more holding back. And it's not like Sodom was just recently like this. This has been the history of and let me also say this. This isn't just Sodom. Okay? This is Sodom. This is Gomorrah. This is also the city that Lot chooses to flee to instead of where God wanted him to go. So when God is going to bring down this destruction through fire, it's going to cover a vast region of area. And so the angel said, go out and get everybody that's with you, get them out of here. We're about to destroy the place. So I love verse 14. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting, or they thought he was joking. So why do you think that is? I mean, you have, and it's not like they don't know that Lot believes in the God of Abraham. But what does this tell you about his life when he says, hey, God had just told me through these angels that he's going to destroy our city, and they think he's joking? What do you think that tells you about Lot himself?
Full baloney or fake, or
okay.
Not living with.
I mean, why do you think they would think that he was joking?
They probably never saw him worship or.
Okay.
Lord.
Yeah. I would put it like this. Let's say that you are a Christian, you're in the workplace, you never talk about your faith. You never really live your life in a way that anybody ever knows that you're a Christian. And then one day you're at work and maybe, for whatever reason, you decided to pick up the Bible and you start reading through Revelation and you read about the judgment that's coming upon the world. And you tell your coworkers, hey man, you'll never guess what I read last night. And God is going to judge the world. And not only would they think just in itself that's odd, but if you've never talked about your faith and you never lived in a manner that would give any indication, they're thinking, I didn't realize you were religious, right? And I think that's kind of what you have here is like all of a sudden God, Lot is talking about his God and such, and so they don't believe him. And so in verse 15, as morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So I want you to think about that from he lingers. Why do you think he lingers? I mean, you were just told by these angels that God's about, we're here, we're going to destroy the city. You need to get out of here. Why do you think he lingers? I mean, wouldn't you think that I mean, it's like when the tornadoes, you hear that the tornadoes are coming, and just like your first thought is, okay, we need to get out of here, right? So why do you think he lingers?
Because he's still in the world with them,
Okay?
some part.
Yeah, I think he's afraid of what he's going to lose. It's like, you know how, in places where they have the forest fires and, they're told to evacuate, and some people choose to stay behind, right? Why?
Because they don't wanna lose their possession.
Right, they don't want to lose what they have, right? And I think that that's the case. Lot had this, it's kind of sad to say, because again, if you think of Lot in today's terms, you would say he's a Christian, but this had become his home. And it'd be like saying, for us as believers, I mean, all of us, I think, are longing for heaven, right? That's our home. This is not our home. But what if, you heard a Christian say, somebody says to them, hey man, I can't wait to get to heaven. And the other Christian says, I'm fine here. I don't care if God didn't ever come. Would that sound strange to you? Right? Because this is not our home. But yet for Lot, this was his home. And he's afraid of what he's going to lose. And so, again, it says, but he lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought him out, one said, escape for your life, do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley, escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life, but I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. And he said to him, behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zor. So think about this. The angel says, flee to the mountains, if you will, right? And Lot says, God, don't. Let me go to this city over here, because if I go over here, I'm going to die. Now think about how illogical that sounds. I mean, if he had stayed in the city, what would have happened? He would have died, right? And so the angels grab him, take him out of the city, and say, go flee to the mountains. And he says, well, I can't go there, because if I do, I'll probably die. And it's like, what, you think God can save you from the destruction of Sodom, but you don't believe he can protect you? But I don't think that was the only reason. He says, there's a little city over here. Let me go to the little city. So his desire not to go to the mountains was not so much about saving his life, not, because he was afraid that he might die there. I think it's because he didn't want to. And so I would put it this way. How many of you known people or seen shows where people live off the grid out in the middle of nowhere? Okay. Now some of you go, oh, I would love that. I wouldn't, okay? I'm just being honest. I'm not one of those people. I don't want to live off the grid, right? I want to be, and it's like when Jennifer and I first moved here, we were talking about, some people said, well, matter of fact, the realtor took us out to McClaw's Road, and it's like, I'm not sure I really want to live out there. I want to be in town, And it's like, wow, that's really far out there, right? To me, that was living off the grid. I wanted to be in town. But I'm pointing this out because I think that's really what the issue is for Lot. I don't want to be off the grid. I want to be in town. Now, he points out that this is a little place, right? But the interesting thing about it is that later on we'll see that he leaves the city. And he goes to the place that God told him to go to, right? And so the issue of him not going to the mountains was really because he was fearful rather than he just didn't want to be out in the middle of nowhere all by himself. If that was really the issue, then when he went to the city, he would have stayed there, right? And again, take note of the fact that the angel tells him, all right, hurry up, go there, because I can't do anything until you get there, which tells you that it's not just the cities that itself was going, it was going to be the whole region that was going to be laid waste. And so he chooses to leave. And so it's like, well, why does he leave? Because I think he realizes that there was no difference. Just because the city that he goes to was small doesn't mean that, look, if he had not gone there, that place would have been destroyed, just like Sodom, just like Gomorrah, right? Because the wickedness was the same there. So why do you think God allows him to go? Because that's not where God told him to go. It's not where God wanted him to go, but that's where God allowed him to go. Why do you think God allows him to do that?
I think it's like us. If we don't obey God and His will for our life, He'll allow us to go where we want to go to show us that in the end, God knows best, and we don't.
Yeah. Have you ever had those times in your life where you knew that God wanted you to go one way, but you wanted to go a different way, and God says, okay, you can do that. You're not going to like it, right? I'll let you do that. And then, after you get there, you just go, it's like, why did I do that? Remember that old show, Father Knows Best? Well, that's true of God, right? God knows best. But sometimes we think that we know best, and we think we know what's best for us. So again, it's just interesting that, he wants to go to the city. God allows him to go, but eventually, he will turn around. And so he goes on in verse 23, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valleys and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind them looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So why does she look back? And I can tell you it's not because she wanted to see the fireworks. Okay? What does that tell you about her? Because remember, they made it very clear. Don't look back. And somebody might look at it, well, so what? What's the big deal? Why does she look back?
See it one last time.
That's where her heart was.
Yeah, that's where her heart was, right? Now, I was mentioning this morning, that what's interesting is when Abraham left his home to come to Canaan, you hear a lot about his wife. But you didn't hear anything about Lot. And some believe that Lot's wife was actually an inhabitant of Sodom that he ended up marrying while he was there. And so she looks back because that's where her heart. And so this is one of the reasons that I say that Lot was the only righteous person, because I don't believe that Lot's wife worshiped the God of Abraham. I think she worshiped the gods that the other people worship. And so she looks back and she is judged for it. And in verse 27, and Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. We're going to stop here tonight, and we'll finish up chapter 19 and continue in chapter 20 next week. But, as bad as it got, think about it. The place that Lot had fell in love with gets destroyed. His wife dies because she disobeyed and looked back. And, when you think it can't get any worse, it can, as we're going to see next week. But again, it's just... I was thinking about this because, like I said, the time of judgment came for Lot. I mean, for Sodom and Gomorrah, right? I mean, there was no redeeming it. God had given them time and time, and it was just, and so this was the time of judgment. And I remember Jennifer said something this morning about, you know, our nation, because we basically now know what our government situation is going to be. You know, the Democrats are going to control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, right? And so Jennifer said earlier this morning, you know, it's like judgment is going to come now upon this nation. And then I was watching, looking at somebody's posted on Facebook, judgment is coming to the country. Time, judgment is coming. And I think that that is likely the case for our country, that our, you know, God has given us time for grace and mercy, and our nation kind of spit it in God's face and said, we're going to do what we want to do. And it's like, okay, judgment's, now it's time for judgment. And hopefully the Lord is coming for us soon. And but if not, we'll get through it, you know, either way. But and again, I think, you know, I remember back years ago, some of you may remember when Billy Graham had said regarding, I think it was San Francisco, that if God doesn't judge them, that he'd have to repent for what he did for Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what our nation has become. Not just a one city, but our nation has become that way. And so judgment, and it's not just our nation, it's the world as a whole, and I do believe judgment is coming, and we need to get ready. So, Father, we do thank you again, as I'm reminded, as I mentioned in my prayer this morning, that I thank you, Lord, that we can learn from Lot's example. And I'm not saying that Lot was a good example, but he was an example of what we are not to be. And I pray, Lord, that as your people, that we would remember that this is not our home, that you are preparing a place for us, as you tell us in John chapter 14, and that if you go to prepare a place, that you will come again to take us to that place that you have prepared for us. We, Lord, have to live in this world until you come to take us out of this world. But Lord, may we not be of this world. See, I think that was part of the Lot's problem, is not that he lived in the world, but his heart to a certain degree had become one with the world. And even though I do think to a certain degree he tried to bring about change, but you know, when we think about the kind of life that the people were living there, it's like, why in the world, if you are, again, using today's term, if you are a Christian, a believer, so Lord, I pray, you know, that while we're waiting for your, and I believe that your return is soon, but until that time, may we live holy and righteous lives. May it be very obvious to the people around us that we are people of God, that we believe in Jesus Christ, that we live our lives for him, even though we may stand out in a negative sense, but God, may we have a heart to want to reach the people around us, because, you know, I think how sad it is when Lot tried to warn his sons-in-law. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that he just didn't live a very godly life. Lord, I pray that there would be no doubt in the minds of the people around us who don't know you, that we are not just people of faith, but people who believe in the one true God and who live according to the word of God. May no one who knows us ever be surprised that we are a Christian. May we be bold about proclaiming our faith through our words and through how we live. And again, God, I do believe that judgment is soon coming upon the world, and we need to be preparing ourselves. We need to be preparing for the coming of you, for your bride. We are your bride, the church. And so help us to be readying ourselves for that moment. Help us not to get entangled up in the affairs of this world. May we have a light touch on things and stay focused on the spiritual. And so again, we thank you for your word and just ask that as we go forth, may you watch over us and just prepare us for coming